At 5 every morning, the streetlights hummed with a dying flicker above Miguel. He moved with a rhythmic, heavy stride through the silent neighborhood, his lungs burning as he pulled in the frigid air. He did not slow down until he reached the overgrown lot. He pulled his bat from the weeds and began to swing. He swung at the shadows, over and over, until the wood bit into his palms and left raw, weeping blisters. He did not stop to look at them. He only reset his stance and drove his weight into the air again. His father stood in the doorway, his silhouette anchored against the dim light of the house. "Why push yourself in the dark?" his father asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. Miguel stopped. He wiped a streak of sweat from his forehead with his forearm, his chest rising and falling in sharp, jagged pulses. He pointed a trembling finger toward the hazy, distant city skyline glowing on the horizon. "Because that is where I belong," he replied. He turned back to the lot and tightened his grip on the bat, ready to start the cycle again. Years later, the silence of the stadium carried a different weight. The stands were hollow, echoing only with the sound of cleats clattering against concrete as his teammates gathered their gear and walked toward the exit. Miguel did not look up. He watched the last of them disappear behind the dugout. He stood alone in the center of the diamond. He dragged a heavy plastic bucket of balls toward the mound. The plastic scraped against the dirt, a harsh, grating sound that filled the emptiness. He reached the mound and tipped the bucket. Leather balls spilled out, settling into the dust. He picked one up, felt the seams bite into his fingers, and began to throw. He threw toward the backstop, over and over, until the rhythm turned into a blur of motion. He did not aim for precision. He aimed for endurance. With every pitch, his shoulder muscle tightened, then stretched, then burned. He ignored the fire radiating down his arm. He ignored the sweat stinging his eyes. He reached back for another ball, his movements mechanical, his focus absolute. He was a machine built for a purpose no one else could see, throwing into the dark, punishing his own body to bridge the gap between where he stood and where he intended to go. The sun dipped low, casting long, distorted shadows across the infield. Near the rusted perimeter fence, a man paused, his hand resting on the metal mesh. He was waiting for the final bus to the city, but the rhythmic thud of a ball hitting a glove kept him rooted in place. On the field, Miguel did not know he was being watched. He moved with a frantic, desperate energy. Roundall skipped off the uneven dirt, veering sharply toward the foul line. Miguel reacted before the thought even formed. He launched himself sideways, horizontal in the air, and slammed into the hard-packed earth. The impact jarred his teeth. He felt the grit of the field tear through his skin as his knee scraped deep into the dirt. He did not check the wound. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the blood trickling down his leg, and whipped the ball toward first base with a snapping motion of his wrist. The man by the fence shifted his stance. He pulled a worn notepad from his pocket, the tip of his pen hovering for a second before he began to write. The invisibility that had defined Miguel for years began to fracture. The scout watched him sprint back to the mound, his movements fluid despite the pain, and turned the page to write more. The bus rattled, a constant, low-frequency vibration that hummed through the floorboards and into the soles of his feet. 10 hours of highway stretched out ahead. Around him, the air grew thick with the sound of deep, rhythmic breathing as his teammates slumped against the windows to call us to sleep. Miguel remained right. He sat in the middle of a cramped row, his knees pressed against the back of the seat in front. His hands worked carefully. He held a crumpled paper napkin, smoothed flat against his thigh, using a dry pen. He sketched the geometry of a swing, mapping out the arc of his arms and the rotation of his hips. He traced the lines over and over, refining the angle of the follow-through until the ink bled into the paper fibers. The bus hit a pothole, jolting the entire cabin, but he did not look up. He stared at the napkin until the patterns burned into his vision. The exhaustion of the day pulled at his eyelids, but he countered it with a sharp, disciplined focus. He was not just riding to a minor league town, he was dissecting his own mechanics, turning the silence of the night into a classroom. Every time the bus swayed, he adjusted his internal rhythm, simulating the pitch, the swing, and the contact, over and over in the dark. The minor league town greeted them with a wall of humid air that clung to the skin. While his teammates dropped their gear in the lobby of a cheap motel, their voices rising in a chorus of complaints about the heat and the lack of decent facilities, Miguel walked past them. He did not hear the grumbling. He did not register the sagging beds or the flickering hallway lights. He carried his glove and a single bat toward the nearest field, a patch of worn grass 3 blocks away. The sun was a heavy weight, but he started his routine immediately. He dropped to the dirt, performed a set of push-ups, then moved to the batter's box. He swung. The sound of the bat slicing the stagnant air was his only companion. He swung again. He repeated the motion until the repetition erased all conscious thought, until the swing was no longer a decision, but an reflex. He ignored the stinging sweat in his eyes and the muscle ache radiating from his shoulders. He fielded imaginary grounders, diving into the dust until his palms were raw and his breathing grew sharp. While the others sought shade and comfort to escape the grind, Miguel forged his own. He repeated every movement until the process was absolute, hardening his resolve against the pressure of the season. The team manager sent word at dawn. Miguel walked the length of the hallway, the floorboards creaking under his boots. He reached the door at the end of the corridor, where the air felt stale and trapped. He knocked twice. A voice from inside cut through the quiet, short and clipped. He pushed the door open. The office was barely wide enough for a single metal desk and 2 chairs. Dust motes danced in a sliver of light from a high, narrow window. His manager sat behind the desk, looking at a stack of documents, not moving. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing against Miguel's chest. The manager did not look up, but reached out, his hand sliding across the scarred wood of the desk. He took a single thick manila folder and tossed it. It landed with a dull thud, sliding until it hit the edge of the table. Miguel stopped. He stared at the folder. The edges were worn, the paper thick with potential. He took a step forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the seal, his hands, calloused and stained with the dirt of 1,000 practice swings, betrayed him. They shook. He gripped the edge of the paper, the suspense of his entire existence narrowing down to the contents hidden inside that single, folded sheet. Miguel flipped the cover back. His eyes locked onto the bold, typed letters at the top of the page. He read the words Major League Contract once, then blinked, his gaze dragging back to the start to read them a second time. The ink looked permanent, the stamp at the bottom, official. His breath hitched in his throat, a sharp intake of air that felt like the first time he had truly inhaled in years. The manager leaned back, his chair groaning under the shift in weight, and offered a singular, slow nod. That movement broke the tension. The office, which had felt like a cage for the last 10 minutes, suddenly widened. Miguel let his hands drop to his sides. The paper remained on the desk, but the weight of it had shifted from the page to his own chest. He felt the phantom ache of 1,000 dawn swings in his shoulders and the lingering sting of blisters from years of field drills. All of it had led to this line of text. He looked at the manager, his jaw tight, trying to find words that would not shatter the fragile reality of the moment. The manager simply gestured toward the door. Validation had arrived, not in a roar of applause, but in the quiet, absolute finality of a signed page. The tunnel ended in a blinding rectangle of light. Miguel stepped through the threshold, and the silence of his long journey vanished. The roar of the crowd hit him like a physical tide, a wall of sound that vibrated through the soles of his boots. He did not look at the thousands of faces in the stands. He did not search for the cameras mounted on the perimeter. He walked toward the center of the diamond, the grass beneath him perfectly manicured and cool. He stopped near the batter's box and held his hands up to the stadium lights. They were calloused, the skin thickened and scarred from years of gripping a bat in the damp, lonely hours before dawn. He traced a line of hardened tissue across his left palm. The stadium lights reflected off the dirt, casting long, sharp shadows toward home plate. He gripped his bat, feeling the familiar weight shift in his fingers. The noise of the crowd faded into a dull hum, secondary to the pulse in his own wrists. He was a reaching longer a boy running through a quiet neighborhood. He was a professional standing on the stage he had built with his own sweat. He planted his feet, dug his cleats into the earth, and looked toward the mound. The pitcher's fingers tightened on the leather seams. Miguel watched the grip, noting the slight rotation of the wrist. Everything else in the stadium vanished. The roaring crowd became nothing more than static, a distant background hum that held no weight. Miguel shifted his weight, his back foot grinding into the dirt to find the perfect pivot point. The pitcher began his motion, a blur of movement that triggered a decade of repetition in Miguel's mind. He did not think, he did not calculate, he simply moved. His hips rotated, his core coiled, and his arms unleashed the bat in a clean, violent arc. The metal met the ball with a sharp, thunderous crack that sliced through the air. He did not even watch the trajectory at first. He felt the vibration travel through the handle, up his forearms, and into his shoulders, the exact, familiar feedback from thousands of mornings spent in an empty, silent lot. He looked up. The ball was already a white speck climbing against the blue sky, soaring deep and true. It cleared the wall with room to spare. The silence of his childhood labor had finally spoken, echoing now across the entire stadium. Miguel dropped the bat. It hit the dirt with a dull thud that he barely heard. He took his first step toward first base, his cleats biting into the soil. As he rounded the bag, the roar of the crowd began to lose its sharp edges, fading into a distant, rhythmic pulse. By the time he hit second, the stadium felt empty, save for the path ahead. The wind pushed against his chest, cooling the sweat that still clung to his skin. He kept his eyes on the white chalk line, his breathing deep and measured, just as it had been on those dark mornings before the sun rose. Every stride was familiar, a ghost of the thousands of miles he had covered alone in the shadows. He rounded third and saw the catcher standing still near home plate. The intensity of the dream that had carried him through the years finally settled into a steady, quiet weight. He crossed the plate, his foot touching the rubber. He did not look back. He stood for a moment in the center of the diamond. The game finished, the distance covered, and the destination reached.